Right. Episode 2 already. I think I'm going to do about 20 episodes and then have a break. When I say that, and I will likely just keep going as long as people still want to talk to me, as long as people still listen. Yes. I will just preface this uh, episode with that I'm not talking about education in Queensland schools. It's just a discussion around occupational violence in schools in general all over the world. It's a known fact that this is a problem and it's getting worse. And the idea is that Joe provides his expertise on why do we see those problems and practical tips for teachers and schools that can be implemented to deal with. We're never going to stop violence. It's a part of society. I don't think we'll ever get away from. Um, but yeah, all right. Joe, do you want to introduce yourself and who you are and what you do? And you're a man of many talents, wear many hats.
I'll try to, yeah, many hats and not much hair. No, look, I'll try to keep it sort of on topic. So, my name is Joe Saunders. I've been a consultant in occupational violence prevention and security for some form or another for nearly 20 years now, working both on the front lines in violence prevention roles. I've done academic studies into violence-related subjects, particularly in psychology and criminology fields, and also worked in government and then as a consultant working to many other government departments around how to manage the risk of violence in general, a special focus on occupational or workplace violence, but also working around topics like family and domestic violence, countering violent extremism, premeditated predatory violence, mental health related issues, etc., etc. So pretty much anywhere where people are awful to each other, that's kind of my space.
Yeah, what sort of violence do you see within the education setting? It's not always premeditated. A lot of it is situational. Kids
Yeah, look,
being kids, and
yeah, schools is a really interesting area to look at this, and obviously a very sensitive area too. So, similar to you, I'll just preface to say I'm not talking about any particular department, any particular state. This is just general observations, and certainly from the conversations I've had with my many friends that are teachers. In fact, my initial career path when I came out of high school, I thought I was going to become a teacher. So,
yeah,
a number of the people I went to uni with are teachers, and I hear a lot of the first-hand reports about what you guys are dealing with, and certainly from a professional point of view, we hear a lot of stories and talk to a number of education providers. I think the general theme is that it's varied, right? You've got violence that happens between children or between students, I should say, not always children, but between students, where you've got maybe a teacher that's having to get involved to try and break something up or try to maintain peace. You can have violence that's directed at the teacher because of disciplinary issues or bullying, because bullying isn't just between kids. Students can
yeah,
bully teachers, so that can happen as well. We've also seen violence between parents and teachers, parents and administrators, parents and principals, where there's either actual violence or the implied threat of violence, or there is other what we consider non-physical forms of violence that may occur. We've seen sexual assaults, we've seen sexual harassment, sometimes even kids sexually assaulting or sexually harassing teachers. So there is a huge spectrum that goes beyond what most people think about teachers might deal with, which is, yeah, if you think about when we went to school, we're about the same age. Most of us, the violence in school was between kids, and maybe the teachers would get involved and break it up. And if you you went to a nice school anyway. I won't say that was the same for everyone, but yeah, I remember once a teacher accidentally got punched in the face, and that was like talk of the schoolyard for like the whole year. Because
yes,
yeah, someone swung a punch and didn't realize the music teacher was there. But that's that's kind of the challenge, I think, is that it is so varied, and teachers aren't usually selecting a career in teaching because they want to deal with violence. It's
yeah.
not the makeup, it's not in the mentality of most teachers to know what to do in those situations, or to be able to intrinsically make good decisions, or feel prepared to manage those situations.
Yeah, it's a lot of instinctual
Mm,
reactive management of violence and conflict with,
mm,
without a lot of uh, without a lot of training as to how to be proactive in the management. I guess it's probably the best way to look at it. We tend to react to things that are happening as they're happening. You know, not not trained, teachers aren't trained at uni to be able to pick up when those things are about to happen or when there's a flashpoint is about to be reached. We just kind of usually get that. We see it when it's at that point.
Yeah, yeah. And look, the data that's been out there, and I will preface to say that the data is usually reported by unions, which are a great source of information. But yeah, obviously we don't we can't have monitors in every classroom to determine what the actual
Yeah.
statistics are. So it's what is reported. And you know, we've seen some reports that up to 90% of teachers responding have experienced violence at some point in their careers. And when we say violence, it's not always being struck, right? It could be a
Yeah.
threat, it could be verbal, it could be a implied threat. It might just be a teacher feeling threatened because someone was watching them as they went to their vehicle. So there's a broad range of when we say violence, what we're actually talking about. But we also know that, and as is the case in every single industry that I've ever consulted to, violence is underreported. Teachers
Yeah.
are just like everyone else. They just accept a certain level as being normal, and
Yeah.
therefore they, due to time pressures or because they feel like nothing will be done or whatever, they just don't bother reporting it. So it is concerning when when you see the high number of incidents that are reported, and then you consider that probably at least 50% are not being reported.
Yeah. And sort of and not having that quantified definition of what violence is. Because I think I just think of violence as punches being thrown.
Mm.
I didn't
Yep.
really think about the other things until you highlighted them there. So that's interesting. And I think the statistics would probably be even worse if people were reporting based off a broader definition rather than just well fighting, being struck, being threatened.
Yeah, look, and that's a huge point that yeah, as a consultant, as an educator, and now working in management in a government department, looking at this issue. One of the huge things we try to get across to people is that you don't have to wait to be hit for it to be violent.
Yeah,
So if you feel threatened, if you feel intimidated, if someone is trying to coerce you, if someone's trying to influence your behavior through fear, that's usually a form of violence. And if that's the
yeah,
case, then it's something that we absolutely need to address because one, the psychosocial ramifications of people's morale, feeling fearful to go to work. We see how many teachers wash out of teaching in pretty short order after coming out of
yeah,
uni. We know that's an issue. And it's not just an issue for the teachers, it's an issue for all the kids that would have been perhaps positively impacted by that teacher. Yeah,
yeah,
how many
definitely.
teachers do you, sorry, how many students do you actually impact over an entire career? And if
Yeah,
we lose that teacher after 3 years because of a toxic work environment, then how many kids are worse off for that decision, right? So it goes so much bigger than that. And unfortunately, we do tend to pay attention. Well, I mean, fortunately, we do pay attention, hopefully, when there are assaults. And yeah, God forbid, teachers threatened with weapons and all that kind of stuff. It's very
yeah,
sensationalist, and it does, if especially if there's video of it, the media will run with it and we might see some action. But what goes unnoticed is sometimes the lower level stuff that builds up over time. And research shows that lower level intimidation, threatened, feeling unsafe at work, that has a sometimes a more corrosive impact than a singular high
yeah,
intensity event.
yeah, yeah. Single high intensity event, you can go home for the day, debrief, come back a couple of days later,
Yeah,
and
look,
yeah, it might
you
be
can write
awkward.
it off as an anomaly, but if it happens every single
Yeah,
day, you just get to accept that's normal.
yeah, yeah. And I think the what is normal is getting more and more. What people consider as normal with violence in schools is probably getting more and more and more and more as the problem gets bigger and bigger. And
Mm, mm.
what are I guess what are probably the biggest impacts on a school on a school that sort of has those big violence problems? What are the negative impacts
So
on them?
look, yeah, look, there are many, and just because without knowing who's going to be listening, I'll cover off on on a couple of different viewpoints.
Yeah,
From the administration point of view, from a uh, work health and safety point of view, you have an obligation to keep your staff safe. Like that, that is not
yeah,
ambiguous. You have an obligation to keep your staff safe. We know that occupational violence is a risk in the workplace. It has to be managed. We know that. It is very clearly defined in the legislation. If you're in Queensland, the work health and safety regulations now include psychosocial risk, which explicitly calls out work-related violence. So you have an obligation. That's the first and foremost thing. You can end up being in trouble from a work safe point of view if you don't do that. So that I'd hate that to be the motivation, but that is a factor.
Yeah,
Um,
should
the
should be the backup, but
yeah, I just have to get that one out of the
the
way first.
backstop. Yeah,
Yeah. I think for me, the biggest impact that I see it's again not usually related to the big scary incidents. It's the ongoing little ones, and that is you can end up with two things happening. Either someone leaves the profession altogether because they've just accepted that this is how it is, and I don't like it, and I don't want to be part of this. It's not how I want to spend my life, and that's a personal choice. And people make that choice for all sorts of reasons. And if
yeah,
they find they just actually don't like teaching, or they actually just don't like kids, cool. All right, no problem. We've all changed careers at some point, no doubt, and that's fine. But they're making that decision because they haven't received the support they needed, or they haven't been adequately prepared for a risk, or worse, they've tried to report the risk and been told just to suck it up, it's part of the gig, then that's really problematic. Uh, so there's one avenue where teachers leave the profession altogether, and the second avenue is they stay, and sometimes that's worse. And you end
yeah,
up with people that stopped caring 20 years ago that are still teaching, and that is really really toxic because what ends up happening, and I'm not just going to single out teachers here. I've seen this in every industry that I've consulted to around this topic. People that lose faith in humanity or lose faith in their customers or their service recipients or whoever they are in whatever industry we're talking about, they tend to just end up with a low level resentment for the people they're actually there to serve. And
yeah,
if you've ever been served by someone, let's just talk about retail, for example. If you've been served by someone, you can tell they kind of resent you for being there. Like
yeah.
it
You
kind of
know,
like it triggers something in you as well. You're like, well, screw you. Like I'm literally the reason you have a job. And those people tend to be disproportionately impacted by future violence and aggression because
yeah,
their general demeanor and their attitude is kind of negative. So there are many impacts. Obviously, then you can have extreme incidents where people end up getting injured. We can have trauma as a result of those incidents. Trauma for even kids that weren't involved that just witnessed something happen. Um, we, as a society, we are generally getting more trauma informed, which is a fantastic thing. But you might end up with a number of kids that they'll witness an incident and have some kind of traumatic reaction to that, and it may derail them or destabilize them for a period of time. So there are a lot of different impacts that can happen. Not least of which, if you're talking about private education, there might be real financial consequences of people leaving the school and so on and so forth.
yeah,
So
yeah. And if it's constant and ongoing, you're looking at that sort of complex PTSD and trauma
yes,
responses rather than
yeah,
just a standard one incident, which is quite traumatic. It eventually heals from. You're getting a low level of it every single day. You will have that permanent stress response ongoing, which then affects the way you deal with the kids, which then usually begets more violence, more
100%.
reactive behaviors, and that cycle just gets worse and worse.
And
And
then
we
those
probably
people
see
end up
that.
mentoring the next generation as well and tell them that it's
Yeah,
okay as well. That's
yeah.
that becomes even worse.
And and I know many educational organizations and departments don't we're not allowed to speak about it, even publicly, or we shouldn't talk about it privately. So we don't really know if what's normal, what's okay, what's acceptable, and where's that point. We have
Yeah,
no idea.
and look, some teachers, and I'm just hypothesizing here, may feel like maybe this is their fault. Like maybe it's just their classroom. Like if no one's
Yeah,
talking about it, is it just me? Can I
yeah,
not control these kids, or is there a reason the kids are being so mean to me?
yeah,
And there's certainly, there are pockets of society that are impacted by this more than others. We know ethnic minorities will tend to get picked on more, or yeah, minorities of any sort. Really, it doesn't have to do with ethnicity. If kids can single out a point of weakness that the teacher is sensitive about, and
yeah.
that's not in any way discouraged in a way that matters, then you can have a teacher that's legitimately being bullied every time they come to work.
Yep. Yeah, and there's that line of ignoring versus engaging. And when do you ignore? When do you engage?
Yeah, yeah, and that's
Um,
hard, right? Because that really has to come from the top. It has to be backed up by
yeah,
actual disciplinary action from administration.
yeah, and it's got to be proportionate to what's going on and fair for everyone. Um, just being careful with what I say. Okay, so matching anything too specific. Um, what sort of situations in the schools do you think you would see more violence than others? What
Yeah, look,
violence?
yeah, I know what you're trying to get to.
Yeah,
Look, there's certainly, if I can focus on the areas where it's easier to treat, I think that's probably
yeah,
just for real actionable takeaway point of view.
yeah,
The areas that I see that are easily preventable or more easily preventable would
yeah,
be situations, especially where you've got a parent who might be becoming aggressive towards a teacher, right? So
yeah,
these situations to me are much more cut and dry because they're not there's no longer a juvenile involved. It's no longer a in healthcare we call it a therapeutic relationship, but that relationship between
yeah,
teacher and student, which has to be maintained to some level. When you've got a parent, you know typically that parent's coming in, not always, but typically like these sort of things do happen during parent teacher interviews when the parent has said they're going to come in and complain about you know, Johnny being suspended or whatever. Um,
yeah,
so we kind of have a little bit of heads up, and there are still times where I see this done really poorly. And I like when I'll just use one of my kids going to school as an example. Now, granted, my kids weren't in trouble. We'd never had a negative interaction with the school, so there was no reason for them to be concerned. But I remember coming into a parent-teacher interview, and this is when I think my oldest was in grade one, maybe, and they had sort of a room set off to the side of the classroom where they're doing the parent teacher interviews, and because you know me, I'm a kind of I'm a larger guy, and the teacher was kind of a smaller guy, so he
yeah,
jokingly kind of put himself in the 6-year-old chair, like the little baby
yeah,
chair. So you take the adult chair, I'll take this chair, it's fine, because it would have been very comical to put me in the kids chair, which by the way don't have kid chairs as an option for adults. It's demeaning anyway. Like if someone's going to be a behavioral issue, they're not going to feel good about being in a kid's chair.
no,
But there,
definitely.
but there'd be no thought to the room setup. So he put himself in a position just in terms of the layout of the room. The door was behind me. I was at least twice his size, and he was on the
Yeah,
other side of the room in a kid's chair while I was in a grown-up chair, which gave me like an extra foot and a half of height over him, even sitting down.
yeah,
And if I decided to be angry about anything, he would have had to get through me to get to the door. There was no visibility from outside that room, from anybody else. The entire rest of the building, as far as I could tell, was pretty much empty. So there was very little ability for him whatsoever to be able to get help, yell if anything was going wrong, for anyone to notice there was a problem,
yeah,
unless he managed to get through me. Now that was a I just remember I literally just worked on a project around that for healthcare, and I remember sitting there going, "Man, like we need to help you guys so much." And it was clear it hadn't even really occurred to him that this could be a problem, or else he would have done something different. So
yeah,
and obviously he was also fairly young as well. I think he's like second year out of uni maybe, and we had a good friendly relationship. It's not like he was anticipating me being violent, but I could tell just by that this is how all of them had been conducted. So
yeah,
there's little things like that. Just being sensible when we have meetings. How are we going to set it up for success? Making sure you're close to the door, making sure other people are aware that the meeting is taking place, making sure people are checking on you to make sure everything's okay, or having visibility, having an ability to communicate outside the room, whether that's via a phone, via a duress button, whatever you have that's at your disposal
yeah,
in your facility. But you just don't put yourself in an isolated situation with an unknown person uh, at a time when there's very little surveillance available from anybody else to check on you. So those just be a couple of things. I see this as well with some of the assaults we've seen on principals, where oftentimes principals will have a one-on-one meeting with a parent, or sometimes it's not one-on-one because
yeah,
both parents will attend,
yeah,
or sometimes you might have two parents plus other family members who could be interpreters, for example. And then you might have three or four people potentially with one principal in a closed door room and no procedures in place for how does that principal, who's still a staff member, have the ability to signal that they're in trouble or they're feeling threatened or they're intimidated.
yeah,
And again, it just comes back to a little bit of planning with those. Like, how do we do this? How do we set up the room? Do we have to have it in the principal's office? Can we book a meeting room? Can we position the principal in a position where they're closer to the door, where people can see in? Um, it obviously depends on your school and what facilities you have, but these
yeah,
things are treatable, and we haven't even talked about training. These are just
Yeah.
There's no engineering involved in this. This is just thinking and making better decisions about how we set up these meetings. So I'd say those are probably the easy ones to try to treat. Obviously, it doesn't prevent stuff from happening, although it may. But it is certainly a way to minimize the risk a little bit.
Yeah, but it's that situational awareness, sort of awareness of what's going on around you. And
Yeah,
I'd like to
it's
think
just
that we aren't in a position where we need to think like that, but it's sort of becoming more and more like we are.
yeah. Look, I think we kind of need to get off our moral high horse on that regard and go. Like leaning into optimism isn't always going to be a good strategy, right? So let's
Yeah,
just treat everybody exactly the same and go. You know what? We never know when someone's going to be having a bad day. And this is the other thing too. Like with violence in general. Usually you're not the only trigger, right? There could be a
yeah,
whole bunch of other stuff going on in that person's life. You've caught them on the day that they just got fired and their dog died and they lost access to their kid from another marriage, and now they've got to have a meeting with this child and like,
yeah.
and you just get them on the worst possible day. So let's just assume that everyone's having the worst day of their life and plan accordingly.
Yeah, there's a fine line between being prepared and not giving a weight that you're kind of expecting someone to be. I think,
Yeah.
yeah, coming in and
Oh,
going, these people are here just in case something happens, is immediately going to trigger someone to go, oh, okay.
yeah, if you've got like security standing outside your door, it might be
Yeah,
triggering. But just little
I
subtle
got,
things like the way you position the room,
yeah,
those things can sort of fly under the radar. And to be honest, is what we teach doctors and health practitioners in remote clinics as well. It's fairly normal
yeah.
just to try to stay where you're safe.
So if we go back to students,
Mm.
if you're thinking of a flashpoint, we see, I know a lot of the time we don't see things until they are probably too far gone.
Yep.
With the kids especially, what are some sort of, if you were in a class setting and two kids or a playground setting, what is it? You obviously have the 100 kids running towards that area of the school, you know what's going on there. But
Mm, mm.
before that point, what are some things that you might, a teacher on duty or a teacher in a classroom might see probably before anyone else would,
Yeah,
before it
look,
gets to the point where,
let me clarify before anyone calls me out. I'm not a psychologist. I try not to play one on the internet, but at the same time, a lot of what we're talking about is basic human psychology.
yeah,
Kids are smaller adults with, well, not always smaller even, but they're
most of
younger
the taller
versions.
than me.
Yeah, um, younger versions of adults with less impulse control and less executive function control, right?
Yeah,
Pretty much. So, and for if we talk about teenagers in particular, so high school, and not to say this stuff doesn't happen in primary school, but especially in high school, we see kids being very socially driven. They're very driven by how they're perceived by their social groups, by their peer groups, by things like respect and hierarchy, and whether they're feeling validated in
fairness,
those relationships.
yeah,
Yeah,
fairness
and
as well with
fairness is
kids.
huge, right? Because fairness is ultimately a sign of respect. And one of the
Yeah,
things that I've taught for years, breaking this down for all sorts of different groups, is that usually reactive violence, and I say reactive violence in that it's not premeditated.
yeah,
It's not I'm going to go threaten to stab someone if they don't give me their wallet, which would be premeditated violence, and I'm using violence as a tool to get something I want. Reactive violence where I didn't plan to be violent, but something has triggered me and resulted in this violent outburst or this violent action. So with reactive violence, it nearly always comes down to one of two things. Either that person has felt disrespected in some way, or they have felt
yeah,
disempowered in some way. Now, if you think about how many things you do as a teacher that with a particular student at a particular time might be perceived to be disrespectful or might be disempowering, for example, taking away a lunch break, taking away a phone, taking
yeah,
away um, yeah, schooling, right? Take away their free time. Like that, those are disempowering things. But disrespect could also be things like just the way you look at someone, the way you talk to someone, whether you make fun of them in classroom, or if other people are making fun of them. Right now, most kids on most days will have a tolerance that in a normal range for things like that happening. Right, and you'll get a feel. You've been a teacher a long time. You'll get a feel for for the kids that are like happy to they can give as good as they take, and
yeah,
if they're teasing someone and they get teased back, they're like, oh yeah, good one, whatever. And then there's some kids that have a super short fuse and they will not take any kind of and as
yeah.
part of it. part of the challenge of being a teacher is you got to get to know these kids kind of intimately, and there's a lot
Yeah.
of them, right? And you got to know where each one's tipping point is. And this is why poor relief teachers get get hell, right? Because they know nothing about the personalities in the room. And
I did relief teaching for last year, or the year before last, 2023.
mm,
Never again.
no,
Because
I can't
no
imagine
matter
it
how
was
good
good
a
to be
teacher
honest.
you are, how good your classroom management is, don't have a relationship with the kids. You
And,
doesn't matter
and
how good
everyone
a
knows
teacher
that
you
what you're doing doesn't matter that day.
are. Yeah, no,
So, um,
very hardest job in the world. All the respect
yeah.
in the world for anyone that's relief teaching. Because like, I won't do it again.
So, yeah, so coming back to the respect and empowerment thing. So, if you just keep that in mind, it's a matter of just looking at the world through that lens or looking at social interactions. Is this person feeling disrespected? Is this person feeling disempowered? Is there a way, like if this is about me and the student, not necessarily two students interacting with each other, if it's between me and the student, is there a way I can communicate what I need to communicate in a way that won't make them feel as disrespected or won't make them feel as disempowered?
Yeah.
It's a silly example, but this is an example I use all the time. The very beginning of my career, I was bouncing in nightclubs. That was what I would call that my first violence prevention job. Was
Yeah.
working in nightclubs. 18 years old through 18 through 23-ish. I was working most of my time in nightclubs, and one thing that I worked out just by I didn't really know the reason why I worked, but what I worked out was that if you had to ask someone to leave because they were too drunk, especially a young male, if I had to ask him to leave, I got a lot less issues if I asked him when he was on his own versus if I asked him in front of his friends.
Yeah.
Because in front of his friends, I've now disrespected him. He's been disrespected in front of his peer group, and he feels like he has to save face in some way to be able to maintain his level of respect within that peer group. Now, if that's a peer group that prioritizes toughness, resilience, aggression as something that is valued, then he's going to respond that way, right? And if I wait and I wait for him to go to the bathroom, and as he's coming out of the bathroom, I just pull him aside and say, mate, I know I'm going to ruin your night, but I need to let you know I'm going to ask you to leave. I know you're with a group over there. I'll give you 5 minutes to go and make an excuse as to why you've got to leave. I won't come anywhere near you. I'll let you save face and leave on your own terms. But if you're still here in 5 minutes, I'm going to come and tap you on the shoulder and tell you you have to go. All right. So
Yeah.
I'll give you that grace to be able to make your own escape. And nearly always that worked really, really well. Um, and nearly always, if I did it the other way around, it was sort of like a
It's
playing
a
Russian roulette.
challenge.
Right. Yeah. So
It's
you
a,
get really
it's
nice people that are like, oh man, really? I'm like, yeah, sorry, you gotta go.
yeah.
And you got other people that will just start swinging. So it's all about again respect and empowerment. In that situation, using a very silly example of kicking someone out of a nightclub, I've empowered him to make his own choice, and I haven't disrespected him in front of his friends. So uh, anytime that you have the option to empower somebody, either by letting them make a choice, and a choice can't be a challenge. Okay, so this is
Yeah.
where it goes wrong sometimes when there's a power imbalance. Anytime that you as a teacher say something to a student, there's a power imbalance because you are ultimately have a higher power threshold or power capacity. So it's important that we acknowledge that. If I say you have an option of behaving yourself or going to detention, that's not an option. That's you're not letting them make a choice. You're challenging. You're threatening. It's an
Yeah.
ultimatum, right?
Any
Which is
any
very
kid
different.
with a any kid with a trauma background or oppositional defiance or ADHD is going to go, oh, give me a detention.
Yeah, it's like, oh, really?
No.
Now
Yeah.
let's see how long you want to sit in here with me. Like that's
Yeah, you're exactly right. That's
yep,
exactly what happens.
exactly right.
Oh well,
So
I don't need my lunch.
yeah,
You have to let
that's
me
right.
go eat eventually. So
Yep. So yeah, we got to be careful about how we give those choices. But and we see this as well with diversional therapy and so on, where you're like, okay, I hear you don't want to do this. Do you want to do this one or this one? Like A, B choices.
yeah.
Let's choose something else. And I'm probably getting in the weeds and going off topic of what the original question was, but what I have found works best there is A, B choices. Don't go A, B, C, D choices. If someone's already feeling worked up, they're feeling a bit emotional, they're feeling a little bit escalated. By the time you introduce more than two options, the act of making a decision gets exponentially harder, and they can start to feel disempowered by their own inability to make a decision. So,
Yeah.
even though you've done the
So,
right thing, you've actually made it harder for them. So, two
so if
options is
you've
best.
so if you've got a worked up student, you need them to leave the room or to move their seats.
Yep.
you give them two options and they make the decision, as opposed to
100%.
you need to go outside, do X, Y, Z. Where
Yeah, yeah.
taking away that ability to be defined, which then increases further and further.
No one ever likes being told what to do, right? Even if
Yeah,
it's with someone that we acknowledge has the ability to tell us what to do, no one likes being told what to do. How many times do we tell a student to calm down? Okay, just calm down. You know what you've just done? You've told me what to do.
yeah,
And and if you tell me to calm down, depending on my emotional state, my upbringing, all those things that you have no control over, potentially, uh, what I can hear sometimes is you're saying I don't have a reason to be upset. I don't have a right to be upset. Now, if you don't
yeah,
even know the beginning of the story about why I'm upset, then how rude of you, right, to say that I don't have the right to be upset. Now, not your fault, but your simple action of, hey, let's just take a few deep breaths. Okay, well, let's just take a second to think about this. And meanwhile, like in that student's head, there's this whole backstory that's been going on for weeks with this particular other student potentially.
yeah,
And you're coming here, it's like, oh, you're on his side. Like, I don't know
yeah.
what's going on, bro. I just got here. It's like, I just had a fight with my girlfriend. I ran over the cat on the way out the door, and now I'm dealing with this. Right? I got no idea what's going on. But for the student, you've just become part of this long running saga, and you might end up with really odd behavior that seems disproportionate. So it is so hard to get it right every time. No one ever gets it right every time. You just want to
No,
stack the odds
definitely.
in your favor so that you can try to get it right more often than you get it wrong.
Yeah, and yeah, I guess you want them to. So sometimes letting them sort of vent to you and tell you can bring them down, but other times it also can then escalate the situation, especially if you
Yeah,
seem to be agreeing with what they're upset about. You have to acknowledge
yeah,
what they're upset about, but not be a thing to agree with it. The second you agree with it, you then validate the anger and
yeah.
the emotional side when you're just
Also,
trying to sort of validate that it is okay to have those emotions,
it's okay to
but
feel this
this
way.
is
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
but you need to then deal with it appropriately.
Yeah, and the other thing I'll say is don't do that in front of the other party. Right? Don't
Definitely,
like
yeah,
separate them. Get it like preferably two teachers or two adults at least. Take them separate
yeah,
directions. I will say in most fights that I've seen, kids, adults, whatever, there's usually one party that's more invested than the other. All right, there's
yeah,
one party that was the instigator that really wanted to fight, and there's one party that kind of got worked up in the moment. And if you can identify which of those is which, spend your time with the one that really wants to fight, and hopefully the separation of distance and space and time will calm the other one down if you have to choose. Um,
yeah.
if you obviously if you've got multiple adults that can separate them and work on them individually, that's great. Um, but uh, but yeah, don't let one person tell their side of the story in front of the other one because I guarantee the other one will interject and then you'll end up with a fight
Back
again.
and forth. Yeah,
So
you go back and
yeah,
forth and the tension escalates.
yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, don't and I think well I forget a lot of the time that what we might find to be silly and not a reason to want to fight someone or cause a problem for that kid, it's everything.
Oh yeah, look, and that's a huge lesson for.
For that
eh,
person,
eh,
it's everything.
Yeah, yeah. My reality is different to your reality. You know, what you've lived through is different to what I've lived through, and we're roughly the same
Yeah.
age. Let alone when you've got someone who is going through puberty, who has perhaps all sorts of dark and deep stuff in their background that you know nothing about. They might have personal issues going on at home. They might have a uncle getting out of prison. I don't know. They could like all sorts of things can happen in a kid's life, and you know nothing about it, let
Yeah.
alone just the fact that they're younger. So they've got less reference point. Like if you try to remember all the stupid stuff you got upset about when you're a teenager, right?
Yeah.
And and I think that's a really important point for anyone who deals with kids, teachers, just parents, right? You've got to be able to put in mind. I just literally had this conversation about my 12-year-old recently where I was like, nothing here that she's saying seems to be that big a deal. It's like, yeah, but I'm looking at it through the lens of a near 40-year-old, not through the
Yeah.
lens of a 12-year-old, right? For
This
whom
part's connected to this part. Yeah.
and
40-year
look,
old and a 12-year old, it's not the connections aren't quite there.
yeah, and look, for me, if I had a fight with one of my friends, or I thought my friend was being unfair to me, I've got so much other stuff in my head that is a higher priority than that friendship right now. And I've also got life
Yes.
experience that tells me that people can have disagreements and then make up later and figure stuff out, right? And I know that I'll be able to make more friends if there was a real, if this was a catastrophic issue for some reason, I'd make another friend. But I've got other stuff because I'm thinking about I've got to go to work tomorrow. What's that project I've got to get done? I've got to jump on Liam's podcast this afternoon. Like that, there's other stuff in my head. if I'm 12 years old, that friendship is the only thing in my head, and it's the only thing that matters, and I don't know that it's going to ever be fixed. And if it doesn't get fixed, am I going to be lonely my entire life? Right?
Yeah.
That's the catastrophizing that happens when you don't have life experience.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a really good way to put it, actually.
Yeah.
It's,
And look,
it's
just
that.
to roll with that analogy because I just heard this someone else say this before. Actually, I was talking to a new colleague who grew up in Africa, and she said, you know, it's funny watching Australians freak out when they lose power. She's like
Yeah.
there are Australians like, oh my God, the electricity's out for like a couple of hours, and like if it doesn't come back on before nighttime, it's like the
What do we
world might
do?
be ending. And she's
Yeah.
like, you know, like we sometimes had weeks without power, and it was just a normal thing that you just. And I think there's an element of that resilience when you're a kid, you haven't built those reps of being able to get through hard stuff. So everything
Yeah.
that happens that is hard can seem like a much bigger deal than it is in hindsight when you've got that experience.
Yes. This part of the brain puts things in context
Yeah,
to
exactly.
everything else that's happening around them. And
Yeah.
kids don't have that. They don't have that. They're built all the connections built yet.
Well, that's right. And we're not even touching on the neurology, right?
Yeah.
There's so much stuff. Like, yeah,
12 hours just on the
yeah,
neurobiology of how it works.
yeah.
Um,
Which I won't even try to because that's definitely not my thing.
yeah, I'll go down a rabbit hole here for days. Um, yeah, it's that. So I guess watch this. The classic teacher has their whistle in the playground. There's a
Hmm.
fight, blowing the whistle, sort of
Hmm.
creating more noise and tension and chaos.
Mm.
What may be some better strategies if you're a teacher in a playground? There's some tension, something going on.
Yeah.
Is there anything that could be done that's possibly better than blowing a very loud whistle at a bunch of overstimulated kids' ears?
Yeah, look, I'll be completely honest. There's not a lot of good options.
Yeah,
When you've got a fight that's breaking out, if it's between two kids, it's better than if it's between a group. If it's between a group, like this is
yeah,
going to be real bad, right? Real bad in that, not in terms of necessarily in terms of injury, but just in terms of how to manage it. It's going to be really difficult. Um, I think from a teacher's point of view, try to identify those brewing warning signs as best you can. Obviously, you're not going to
yeah,
have visibility on every kid in every area, but do your best to identify who do I need to keep an eye on and just see whether people are festering. Are they stewing? Is someone amping themselves up? Is someone seem overly animated
you can,
today versus compared to their normal state? Are they pacing around, gesturing in front of their friends in a way that indicates they're trying to ramp themselves up for something? Have they got friends
yeah,
that are trying to calm them down because they're getting really emotional about
yeah, that,
something, right? There's all
yeah, that's
sorts
good
of
actually.
different areas, right? Pay
Yeah,
attention to that stuff. And then if you think you've got concerns, see if you can throw a distraction in there, right? And I'm
yeah,
talking way before the fight, right? But can I go ask that student to do something for me? Literally, even if it's got nothing, rather, it's not even necessarily, hey, I can see you're really stressed. Do you want to talk to somebody? Because if they're really committed, they're going to go, nah.
yeah,
But it could just be, hey, can you go get this from the office for me?
yeah,
Like just pull them out of that moment, pull them out of the headspace they're in, because
yeah,
it takes a lot of people, not everybody, but it takes most people a fair bit of sort of continual reinforcement to build up to that point of going up and punching somebody. And you see this even with adults, right? People that go out and decide I'm going to go and smack that guy. They talk themselves into it over a period of like a couple of minutes sometimes before they go and do it. So if you can pull them out and that development, so that escalation, that can be really
yeah,
useful, right? Even if they come back and they're still angry, they've got to start all over again. So
yeah. So we've only got
so
so much time then
yeah.
to
So
ramp back up.
that's a completely non-physical, non-reactive way of doing it.
Yeah,
And again, this is very hypothetical. It depends on the circumstance and the
yeah,
kid and everything else. Um, I would also, if you're identifying things and you have the ability, I know some schools, teachers are connected via radio to be able
yeah,
to talk to other staff. If you have the option of saying, I think something's going to happen, I don't know what it is. Can I get someone else to come out here and just be an extra set of eyes for me? Or yeah, potentially even response capability, then do that. Like get the preparations in
yeah,
place early. Now, if we're going to fast forward and say we've missed all of that, all happened out of the blue. Maybe the escalations all happened via social media and it all happened
yeah,
like over the weekend. These two are at each other and it's going to happen on first break on Monday morning because that's just what we've decided. You might not see any other warning sign. Oh, you know what? I'll throw in another one. Get some spies. Get some kids that are fundamentally good kids that hang out with the other
Yeah.
kids and get them to tip you off. Right? Get the
Yeah.
intel. Criminal informants are important. But you need to know what the social media beefs are. Most of the kids will know. But the smaller your community is, the easier it is to learn that stuff and find someone who kind of hears what's going on. Now let's just say that we've got the fight ongoing. First lesson that I teach everybody is don't get in between two people throwing punches at each other. It's a great way to get punched by both people.
Yeah.
If you stand in between them, you become the enemy of both. So don't do that. As hard as it is, and most teachers have a protective instinct,
Yeah.
they want to stop it and they want to stop someone getting hurt and they'll put themselves in between and expect the kids to stop. Some kids will, some kids won't. Some kids, like I said before, like the story from when I was in school, the music teacher got socked in the face just because he was in the wrong place. The
Yeah.
student didn't mean to punch the teacher. He was just in a blind rage, didn't recognize that there was a adult standing in front of him and he punched him.
Yeah.
Um,
And
yeah, yeah,
if they're in that full gone state, they're not
yep,
hearing whistles, they're
no,
not hearing you.
yes,
How could you get the attention of something that has already started without
yeah,
putting yourself in danger? I think that's the crux here. It's not
yeah,
without
yeah,
putting yourself in danger.
yeah.
What are some effective strategies that could be used?
There's probably some that violate many procedures and protocols I'm unaware of.
Yeah,
So I've
that's
seen,
all right.
yeah, I've seen lots of things work that probably would not be ever reflected in a policy document. But ultimately, if you have to break up a fight, try to do it from behind.
Yeah,
Try to grab them from behind. Watch for the elbows
yeah,
as they frenziedly sort of flail. But that's the safe way. If you have to physically break up a fight, I'll just go on record and say I don't know what Education Queensland's policy is on that. I'm assuming there's
yeah,
probably a policy that says don't get physically involved, but also don't let them hurt each other. So I'm not really sure how you do both. Um,
yeah. I'm unsure of the exact wording, but
yeah,
it's
and look,
most school bodies. It's yeah, you can't let
don't
them fight, but you also can't physically break them up. And
don't put hands on
there's
them.
sort
Yeah,
of yeah, there's sort of a fuzzy grey area of
and then they frown upon you
what
if
is
you fire hose
acceptable
them
of
as
it.
well.
Yeah, well, that was probably a code of conduct violation. I think turn
Yeah, and
fires on the kids.
using the fire hose
Yeah,
inappropriately. I
yeah.
was actually aware of a big fight that got broken up by teachers turning the sprinklers on though. So I mean, like, or ground
Oh,
staff,
that
not
would work.
teachers. So I was like,
It's that bringing them back down to
it's just a
logical
distraction, right?
thought. Yeah,
Yes, it's like it was a pattern interruption. It wasn't something they expected, and therefore it caused enough of them to go, "What?" And then like everything started like kind of snapped them out of it a little bit. Kind of like spraying the dog with a hose when they're getting all excited. Yeah.
yeah,
Um,
exactly. Yeah.
yeah, please don't put that on record as saying, yeah, the violence prevention expert said we should just hose and spray everyone with sprinklers. But
It would work.
yeah,
Whether that's
yeah,
ethically questionable to be hosting kids down, but
I
it
don't
would
know.
work.
Seems to be better than the alternative. Uh, look, most of the
Yeah,
time, fights last a couple of seconds. Okay,
yeah,
it's unlikely for a fight to go on for a minute, let alone several minutes. It doesn't mean bad things can't happen. But I would say that majority of the time, the majority of the fight is over before the teacher even gets in position to be able to do anything. By the time
yeah,
they hear the commotion, they rush over there. Other kids have broken it up, or they're restraining somebody, or someone's on the ground, and that one person's standing over them. The need to get physically involved is usually less, right? It's more than
yeah,
just separation, keeping the two conflicting parties apart because they've all got friends that they're going to fight with the other friends. So trying to keep them apart and try to manage the actual crux of the real, like, while there's punches throwing on both sides, it's a short period of time and there's not really a good answer because it depends so much on what options you have available to you. Yeah, in certain other areas that are not education, like you'd have a team come in with soft shields and like knocking them both down to the ground and putting them down and restraining them. That's not going to happen with teachers,
yeah,
nor should it. You might be using bystanders to try and assist you. So you might have other kids try and help. You're not going to do that as a teacher. You're not going to tell another kid to go tackle someone for you.
yeah,
So there's a lot of options that are just not really practical or advisable as a teacher. So there is an element of just improvisation and problem solving, and that's why we have to work so hard on the prevention side to try to make
Yes.
sure these things don't happen. Make sure we're from an intelligence and threat assessment point of view, we're identifying the kids that are having troubles. We're identifying the beefs that are happening on social media. We're identifying destabilizing factors in someone's life that might make them more volatile at this particular moment. Identifying for that kid who is particularly more volatile in the moment, who are the kids that tend to get under their skin more and how do we separate them? Like
Yeah.
these are the things that we need to be looking at more so than how do teachers break up fights better. Um,
Yeah. I think that part
yeah.
of the issue when you have someone in a caring role that deeply cares about all the people that they're dealing with
Mm.
is they see a fight, they go into instant, not a lot of logical thought. I need to go and break that up. And
Yeah.
that's when we
Yeah.
see people getting, we can see when we see people, including the kids and the teachers, getting injured and problems happening.
Yeah. Look, it's really hard to fight that instinct. And
Yes.
I'm actually I guess my personal opinion on that is that's an individual decision as to
Yeah.
how comfortable you feel doing that. I don't think any teacher should feel obligated to put themselves in harm's way. And I also, and this is again, this purely a personal opinion, I also don't think that someone who does feel comfortable breaking up that fight physically, if they do so in a responsible and proportionate way, I don't think they should be punished for that. Because if they ultimately save someone from getting hurt, that's a good thing. But I also don't want the 5'2", 48 kilogram, 19-year-old relief teacher, or sorry, the placement teacher
Well,
feeling like they've got to go crash tackle the 220 kilogram rugby guy, right?
yeah.
That's also not going to be a reasonable expectation. So I think the what people do in an emergency, and this is reflected in law as well, but what people do in an emergency is seldom going to look like what you
Yeah.
can write down in a procedure document. It's going to come down to judgment and what I feel like I had to do in that moment. And if it saves someone from harm, good for you. And if you go, there was no way I could have done anything because I would have just got myself hurt or it would have made the situation worse, then also good for you. But everyone's got to make their own call on that, I think.
Yeah, and I think the law, as per the law, that a teacher with a teacher that has students under their duty of care has to act in a way that any reasonable parent.
Yeah. Yep.
And
And
that is very vague.
it's very
And
vague, right? Yeah. Anytime you assume people are reasonable, it
so
becomes an issue.
yeah, and it's there's nothing written in of if two students or there's something happening, this is what you should do.
No.
And
No. Yeah.
I think that leads to a lot of bad things happening because there's not a set procedure, and then people might not step in when they should, or they
Yeah.
don't step in, or they step in when they shouldn't,
Yeah.
because there's no clear sort of pathway. And but I think, like what you just
Yeah.
said, that
Mm.
it's impossible to have a clear idea
It,
because we can't just tear gas them
No, and look, if you tell
crash
teachers
tackle
that
them.
if you tell teachers they're supposed to restrain people, then are we going to start giving everybody control and restraint training? Like,
Yeah,
are we going to
exactly.
start training teachers as part of their degree? They're going to do, cell extractions in prisons. Like what are
Yeah,
they? How far do we go with this if we're going to start making it part of someone's job? Um,
yeah, you're effectively becoming a prison guard and a teacher at the same time.
yeah.
And
Anytime you expect someone to do something, you better be training them how to do it. And I
yeah,
can guarantee that more teachers will end up getting hurt doing the training than they will currently in schoolyards. So.
yeah,
I just keep harping on it. It's so important that we get that preventative stuff right, and we don't just live in
yeah,
the world of optimism that it's never going to happen here because we have nice people. Um,
yeah.
and I
There's
will
not a
just
lot of
say,
benefit. There's not a lot of benefit to the reactive side. It's almost exclusively going to be benefits from proactive from an
yeah, look,
organizational standpoint
yeah,
and the
I will say
teachers.
you
Yeah,
can make things worse by reacting badly.
yeah.
I think that there's a lot of downside to poor reactions. But
So,
the good reaction is just containment. It's just trying to stop it from getting worse, and
yeah,
as doing everything you can with the resources you have, the time you have, the space you have to be able to try to stop that from getting worse, and then move as quickly as we can into post-incident management rather than the during.
yeah. What should we be doing afterwards? It's probably the hardest part.
Yeah, and it's such a cop-out answer to say it depends, but everything depends. We're talking
Yeah,
about such a hypothetical situation that and there's so many variables. But most important thing, obviously, we need to secure the situations. We need to make sure everything's stable, no one's actively getting hurt. We need to be making sure everyone is like if people are injured, How badly injured are they? Do we need to get any sort of medical support? Vast majority of fights in a schoolyard, it might be a black eye tops, right? You might have a little
Bit of
bit of blood,
ice.
but it's probably going to be okay. That said, we have seen some really bad ones. Obviously, if there's been a weapon involved, if someone has, God forbid, we've had a stabbing, we've had a few. Um, then obviously the police are going to need to be involved. Ambulance officers, the ambulance is going to have to be called. Emergency services are going to have to attend. Um, so it's really a bit of a judgment call as to what level of that
Yeah.
immediate first response is required. I would say majority of the time it's going to be pretty self-explanatory. Right? You're just going to either separate the parties, get them off to get some ice, cool down, calm down, see what, and figure out what to do next. Uh, I hesitate to send kids that back to class, even if they seem calm. Uh,
Yeah, nine. I imagine most education systems it
mm,
is they don't go back to class after
yeah,
an incident.
yeah, and I think that would
I think
reflect
that
best practice.
yeah, definitely, and that it's sometimes the quick thought is quickly that's they've been in a fight, straight they give a statement and then it's suspension or exclusion
Yep.
or something else. Is there anything they could do in between before we get to that point and to make the situation better and not sort of make that student feel like I
Yeah,
don't know what the term would be, but
yeah. Look,
sort
I
of
think I think it is important to recognize that we never really have all the facts straight away.
yeah,
So I think anything that happens post incident shouldn't be punitive. It should be we're going to pause. We're just pressing pause on this until we figure out what happened. So that means we're going to if this has been a significant altercation, both parties are going home for their own safety. And
yeah,
I remember, and I assume this wasn't policy at the time, but like when I was in school, there was a number of times a fight would break out at morning tea, and then the same fight would happen in the afternoon tea or after school or something because
yeah,
both of them just got separated, and then they end up going at each other again later. And you look back on that and go, man, how preventable was that? They really, that should have been fairly obvious that when they see each other again, at least
yeah,
words will be exchanged. But so it shouldn't be punitive. It should just be we're gonna, you're going home for your safety, so you can cool down, so you can relax, and then there'd be a follow up probably the next morning. I would actually say that have the next day off potentially, and there should be a
yeah,
follow up from a guidance counselor, psychologist, head of department, whoever it is the appropriate person for that school to contact them and just say, how are you feeling? Are you happy to tell me what happened? Get both sides of the story. At that point, hopefully you've talked to witnesses, you've talked to other kids that might have had intel on what happened, see if you can
yeah,
figure out a chain of events. But we're not jumping straight to disciplinary action. I think it should just be let's keep people safe, let's keep everything contained, figure out what the story is, and then we can make a decision once we've got the facts. I think
yeah.
jumping straight to suspension is it can set a really dangerous precedent where perhaps someone who was in the right and was defending themselves feels like they were punished for trying to stick up for somebody or whatever.
Yeah, and if you have a kid who really wants to get suspended, it's kind of
Hmm.
an
Oh
easy
yeah, I get to
pathway.
go home and play
If they,
PlayStation. That's cool.
yeah, if they know that I'm going to be at school for a week, then I kind of exactly what they need to do,
Yeah,
which could be
yeah,
encouraging kids to,
yeah. And,
to
and look,
engage.
our understanding of developmental psychology and criminal and even juvenile criminology is evolving so rapidly that
Yeah,
like punitive action may not be required at all. Like it might just be a matter of going, okay, this is what the trigger was, this is what was said, or this is what was done. Is there an education thing we can do here? Is it just a matter of separating them for a little while? Is it about, yeah, do we send some work home for the rest of the week? Like what can we do just to calm this down and put some water on the fire and
yeah,
then reintegrate in a safe manner rather than saying you're at fault, you got suspended for 2 weeks. And look, the other thing I'm just going to throw in there, and most educators I think are aware of it, you don't know what you're sending that kid home to when you suspend them.
yeah,
Like it could be a party, and mum and dad don't really care what I do, and they don't even know that I'm home, and I'm just going to get to stay home and play PlayStation. No one's going to call them. Or you might be sending kids home to an environment where they're going to get abused, bullied, bashed, whatever. Or they might be terrified they've disciplined their parents. Sorry, they've disappointed their parents, and they won't say anything, and they'll just leave the home while they're going to school, and they'll go hide out under the bridge for the rest of the day. Like there's so many things that we just have to be thinking about when we make decisions like that.
Yeah, definitely. And to be fair, I think most deputy principals have they know the kids and the families pretty well.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
So
but I think, and this isn't just schools, education, kids in general, but trying to learn from those incidents how to stop that from happening again.
mm,
Could that come before punishment as an option to try and
I definitely
how
think so.
why did this happen? How can we? And I'm sure that does happen, but I think the main sort of action afterwards is straight to punishment rather than let's figure out why it
Yeah.
happened. How can we stop it from happening again? What unmet need did that kid have on that
Yes.
day?
Yes. Absolutely.
And how can we ensure that that kid that those needs are met and we don't have
Yeah.
that kind of action again?
And,
Because
that
usually,
phrasing is so important too. And this is something I picked up from a psychologist friend. What need was this action meeting? Like
yeah,
what need was being met here? And can we meet that need a different way, in a healthier way?
yeah, and kids, it's usually safety. Safety
Yeah.
just starts.
Yep. Whether it's with physical safety, emotional safety, their
Yeah,
place in the pack, their hierarchy, all those things. If I know that punching someone in the face and not tolerate, let's say, for example, well, I'm just going to use teenage boys because they tend to be overrepresented in all the dumb stuff.
yeah,
But let's say we've got two teenage boys. One of them is disrespecting the other one. Let's say they're both sort of in I call them the monkey dance years, okay, where they're very sort of tribalistic from a physiological point of view. They're in breeding years. They're trying to attract mates to pass on their genes to propagate the species. Right. This is the psychology of especially males of
yeah,
that age. So if we know that's going on, and we've got one group or one person that is antagonizing another one, disrespecting, making comments, whatever, at some point the kid who's being antagonized or being disrespected is going to be looked at by his peer group as what are you going to do about it? Now, depending on the nature of that peer group, they may respect his restraint and control and dignity, but usually not, right? Usually it's got like, oh, he's a bit of a pussy, he must be scared. And then as soon as that happens, he's now lost, right? He's lost
yeah,
all his credibility within that group. So that kid might then go, you know what? I'm going to choice. I've got to punch him in the face, right? And then, but he knows I get suspended for 2 weeks, but then I come back, I'm a hero because
yeah.
you don't mess with me anymore, right? And so they actually win out of all this.
Yeah, yeah, and is that the way we deal with things generally as education setting or any
Mm.
particular systems. Are we dealing with it the right way? That's I think a
And
conversation needs to be had. How
and
can
look,
we do it better?
I've got a massive amount of empathy for administrators trying to figure this stuff out because it is really
100%.
like
No,
it's
it's
so
no
easy for
win.
us to second guess and go, wow,
Yeah,
that was a lazy decision. Yeah, but how do you make good decisions in a scalable fashion? Yeah, 100 times a
yeah,
year, like and with 1,000 different kids and 150 different teachers or yeah, staff involved. Like, how do
yeah,
you replicate? You need to have a procedure, you need to have policy, and ultimately, I was a risk manager. Ultimately, you need to err on the side of risk avoidance, which would be don't have them at school. You don't want to find
yeah,
out that, oh, we let this kid come back because they had a really compelling sob story and now they stab someone next week. Like the
yeah,
Courier Mail's going to have a field day with that, right? So
yeah. It's seemingly a
it's so
no-win
hard.
a lot of the
It's so
time.
hard, yeah, yeah. And
It's,
again,
it's lose-lose.
this is why we focus so much on prevention because it's the only one
Yeah,
you can't lose
exactly.
on. You can't lose putting more effort into prevention.
100%. And that kind of segues into this last bit of
Mm.
say you're a teacher setting up, getting ready for the first day of school. And how would you set up your classroom to avoid? Obviously, we want to make it a positive place with colors, and so that if something does happen, everyone's safe, you're
Yep.
safe. If you feel safe, you are less likely to elevate others. If you're
Hmm.
feeling you're in an environment where you're safe, sort of as a teacher, um, and how would you sort of manage your interactions? You could say you've got a kid that does have a trauma background that
Hmm.
does escalate really well. How
Hmm.
would you sort of not so much write a script, but how would you, if that kid does come in on a day and you do notice those behaviors, what would be the best
Mm.
way to
So
interact with them and engage with them?
It's a really interesting question. And certainly if I prep for it more, I might come up with some better stuff. But my first thoughts are I'd want to try and have a conversation with that child about
Yeah.
what they, no, I wouldn't say tell me about your childhood trauma,
Yep.
and tell me what makes you angry. I'd be asking questions like, yeah, what is it about a classroom you don't like? Yeah, what things make
Yep.
you feel frustrated, or are there things make you angry? And what I'd be looking for is things like, okay, most of the time, kids that have some sort of trauma background don't like being constrained. So can I
Yep.
have them sitting if I'm going to have structured seating? Can I have them sitting so they're close to the door so they feel like they can get out? They're not feeling like they're
Yeah.
hemmed in, right? That might be something we look at. If they're sensitive to stimulus, I don't want to have them near something noisy, or I want to be around kids that maybe are a bit louder. I wouldn't necessarily have them directly under the air conditioner where they're going to feel cold more easily, or too far away so they're
Yeah.
going to get too hot too easily. Like
Yeah.
it, it depends so much on the child, but I'd be thinking about anyone who is reactive in general. Give them less negative stimulus. So
Yeah.
give them the ability to have quiet places, give them the ability to have freedom of movement as much as you can. Set some expectations around how they can manage that frustration if they feel it building. So are you okay with
Yep.
them standing up and being standing up and listening as opposed to sitting down and listening? And there's so much more. Like we could go a whole different episode talking about
Yeah.
the overlap of ADHD and
Yeah.
neurodivergence and so on, like and
Yeah.
stimulation and so on, and what works for people. But I'd be looking at all those sorts of things in conversation, and not saying you need to be an expert in it, but just know the basics of, okay, if this kid's expressing to me that they don't like sitting still, or they don't like being contained, or they don't like heat, or they don't like cold, or they don't like noise, they don't like silence, where can I put them in that room? Who can I sit them with that's going to give them
Yeah.
as little of that negative stimulus as possible? And
Yeah.
what strategies am I willing to allow them to employ if they are feeling that way? So
Yeah.
they don't just bottle up and explode.
Yeah. And sort of scaling those measures that's where they start. If they don't regulate themselves, it's going to go
Yeah.
up the scale, so to speak.
Yeah, it's funny. My kids are all in. I've got my oldest just started high school. My three others are in primary school, and I try to explain to my parents like one of the teachers is okay with the kids having fidgets in class. She's like, "Oh, never. My mum said we never would have been allowed to have fidgets in class." I'm like, yeah, but
ADHD
like
didn't exist, mate. So,
yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah. It's all made up. It's all just labels.
yeah.
But yeah, those kids just suffered. Right? Just because
Yeah.
we're allowing something now doesn't mean that it's a new Well, it's a new accommodation, but it doesn't mean it's to a new problem. And ultimately, if that keeps the peace in the classroom, that's a better learning environment, no matter whether there's a fidget in the room or not. So these are some of the things that as we continue to evolve and learn about psychology, about kids, about education, and ultimately my biggest concern is always we get so indoctrinated into a single approach that we stop looking at the data and go, what is working?
Yeah.
And something there's been plenty of experiments that should have worked on paper that just did not work, right? Because of some sort of complexity or an element that we just didn't consider. So we need to keep looking at the data and talking to each other and having forums and having conversations and going to conferences and going, what are you guys doing over here? How are you managing this? Learn from different fields. There's so much we should be sharing that unfortunately teachers go, well, from my experience of 20 years in the classroom, this thing works. Okay,
Yeah.
but maybe it works because of something very particular to you and it's not actually best practice. Yeah. Or you
Yeah.
just convince yourself it works and you kind of put the blinkers on when it doesn't work. Right? There's a lot of
Yeah.
things like that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, as we move further into inclusion, which is all students learning with their same age peers, and we scale rather than putting them in, holding them back, pushing them forward. We would have a grade 8 class, and you have kids that are at grade 2 level all the way up to grade 8, 9, 10 level.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of the teachers from 20 years experience, the dynamic in the environment of the classroom has shifted so much. And there isn't a single standardized approach to managing that kid, the 6 kids with sensory issues, the kid with ADHD, the trauma background kids that were. And I think that's where teachers struggle. There's no sort of one standard approach to this is what you should do. It
Mm.
is a sort of there's a lot of cookie cutting going on. That
Yeah.
this
And
works, so I'm going to take a little bit of this, I'm
yeah.
going to take a little bit of this, and you're trying to
Yeah.
do these 27 things at the same time.
Yeah.
That's probably the hardest part, and I think. probably why a lot of teachers that I feel brain drained at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And I imagine most of my colleagues are probably the same.
Yeah, and look, unfortunately, that's just I don't see a way that gets better from a practicality point of view. But I will say that if they're at least not having to go back and fight their peers about what they did, or
Yeah.
their administrators about what they did, then that will probably alleviate some of the stress. If you're just trying to worry about doing the best thing for the kids and not have to worry about justifying yourself later, yeah, nice perfect world scenario. But
Yeah.
it's one of those things I think we can control. It's just how our understanding of it.
Yeah, definitely. All right. Well, I think leave this for now. Perfect. Thanks,
Cool.
Joe. I'm enjoying just asking questions and listening and
It's
not
fun, isn't
talking.
it? It's fun.
Yeah, I just find lots of people that are way more than me and ask them a whole bunch of questions. And
Mate,
if we get
I
to
did it
bring
for
up,
5 years and it's great.
yeah, that's really good. And I'll try